At 5:30 in the morning, a quiet street in Strongsville, Ohio was still asleep. No traffic, no crowds, just an empty road, a brick building, and a car moving faster than anyone would expect at that hour. Seconds later, two young men were dead. At first, police thought it was another tragic crash. Teen driver loses control, high speed, wrong place, wrong time. But as officers stood at the scene, something didn't sit right. The car hadn't swerved. It hadn't tried to slow down. There were no skid marks, no signs of panic, just a straight line into a wall. Inside that car was Mackenzie Shirilla, 17 years old. In the passenger seat, her boyfriend, Dominic Russo. In the back, their friend, Davion Flanagan. Only one of them would walk away. Investigators would soon uncover data from the vehicle that told a different story than an accident, a story of speed, of control, and of a decision made in seconds that would change multiple families forever. This wasn't just about a crash. It was about whether a teenage girl had turned a car into a weapon, and whether the people who trusted her most never saw it coming. This is the case of Mackenzie Shirilla and the crash that prosecutors say was no accident. Mackenzie Shirilla grew up in Strongsville, Ohio, in a home shared with her parents, Natalie and Steve Shirilla. By the summer of 2022, she was 17 years old, fresh out of Strongsville High School, standing at that in-between point where high school is over but real adulthood hasn't fully begun. It was at that same school where she met Dominic Russo. By the time of the crash, Dominic was 20 years old and already out of school. He was running several small businesses and had been in a relationship with Mackenzie for about 4 years. To people around them, they looked close, but those closest to Dominic would later say the relationship was anything but simple. According to Dominic's brother, the two had a pattern of breaking up and getting back together, sometimes more than once. In 2021, they began living together, spending most of their time at the Russo family home. On the surface, it looked like a young couple trying to build a life early. Behind closed doors, family members say tension kept returning. Dominic's mother, Christine Russo, would later describe the months before the crash as troubled. She claimed there were repeated incidents where Mackenzie became aggressive toward her son. About 6 months before the crash, Christine said the relationship had again reached a breaking point. In July 2022, just weeks before the crash, Dominic called his mother upset. She arranged for a family friend to come and pick him up. That friend later said they saw Mackenzie shouting and making threats, including saying she would crash the car while trying to strike Dominic with her hands. Around that same time, a video surfaced showing Mackenzie threatening to break into Dominic's home. To classmates, Mackenzie had a very different image. People from school described her as someone who admired Regina George, the popular character from the movie Mean Girls, and tried to model herself after that persona. Some said she stood out, not just socially, but in how much attention she drew. There were claims that groups of girls followed her through the halls, watching what she wore and how she acted. Online, she was active on TikTok, posting videos focused on her outfits and lifestyle. Her account attracted a large following, enough that brands were sending her clothes and products to feature. It was a carefully shaped image, confident, stylish, admired. Friends said Mackenzie enjoyed spending time at the Russo home, being around Dominic's family, and driving through the streets of Strongsville in her car. It was a routine that, from the outside, looked ordinary. Alongside them was Davion Flanagan, a close friend of both Mackenzie and Dominic. Davion was 19 years old, a former school athlete, adopted at the age of 8 by Jamie Flanagan after being removed from a difficult biological home marked by drug abuse. To those who knew him, Davion was loyal, upbeat, and always around the couple. 3 young lives, tightly connected, a relationship filled with both closeness and conflict, and a normal routine that would come to an end before dawn. By the evening of July 30th, 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla, Dominic Russo, and Davion Flanagan were together again. It was a summer night, late hours, nothing unusual for 3 young people with nowhere urgent to be. Around 10:15 p.m., they stopped at a graduation party at the home of one of Mackenzie's friends. They didn't stay long, less than an hour, before getting back into the car and heading to another house, this time to see a friend named Paul Burlinghouse. That was around 11 p.m. Inside the house, they listened to music. They talked. They smoked marijuana. No arguments were reported. No one there would later say anything seemed out of control. The hours passed quietly. By the time they left, it was early morning, about 5:30 a.m. on July 31st. The streets were nearly empty. The night was giving way to dawn. Just 4 minutes later, at 5:34 a.m., a security camera caught Mackenzie's car, a 2018 Toyota Camry, slowly making a right turn at an intersection. Nothing strange, no rush, no sign of what was coming. 1 minute after that, another camera picked it up again. This time, the car was no longer easing through the streets. It was accelerating hard. No headlights, no brake lights, just speed. Investigators would later determine the Camry was traveling over 100 miles per hour as it tore down the road. Seconds later, it slammed straight into the wall of a building inside the Progress Drive Business Park near Pearl Road in Strongsville. The impact was catastrophic. When first responders reached the scene roughly 45 minutes later, they found all 3 inside the wreckage, unconscious. Mackenzie was still in the driver's seat, her foot pressed down on the accelerator. Dominic Russo, sitting in the front passenger seat, was dead. Davion Flanagan, in the back, was also dead. Mackenzie Shirilla was pulled from the car alive and rushed to a nearby hospital. At the scene, officers found psilocybin mushrooms and a digital scale in Mackenzie's possession. Body camera footage captured the shock of what responders saw. One officer said the car looked like it had been split in 2. Another called it the worst crash he had ever witnessed. Mackenzie had suffered severe injuries, including multiple broken bones. She was later airlifted to another hospital, where she underwent several surgeries to save her life. Witnesses said that when she was told Dominic and Davion had died, she was inconsolable. But as days passed in the hospital, Mackenzie began posting on social media. From her hospital bed, she shared videos showing the inside of the ward. Her TikTok following surged. Modeling agencies reached out. She filmed herself in a wheelchair attending concerts. She posted joking clips, including one where she said, "I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die." To some, it looked like coping. To others, it felt wrong. She also shared photos of Dominic and Davion dressed as corpses for Halloween. That, along with her online behavior, raised alarms for Davion's sister. She urged her family to contact police, saying something about Mackenzie didn't make sense. Meanwhile, detectives were trying to understand what they had just walked into. At first, the crash was treated as a tragic accident. Then another theory surfaced, that the car might have been tampered with. A mechanical expert was brought in. His conclusion: the vehicle was fully functional. The brakes worked, the pedals worked. There was no mechanical failure. The car had done exactly what the driver told it to do. When police questioned Mackenzie, she said she had blacked out and remembered nothing about the crash. But investigators weren't convinced. As they reviewed camera footage, vehicle data, and the path of the car, a different picture began to form, one where the crash didn't look random but deliberate. Police began to believe Mackenzie had intentionally driven into the building. Their theory? She was trying to kill herself and the two passengers, a murder-suicide, because she feared Dominic was going to leave her again. Then came another detail. GPS data from her devices showed that 3 days before the crash, Mackenzie had driven to that same industrial area, the same stretch of road, the same kind of location. To detectives, it looked less like coincidence and more like preparation. And from that moment on, this was no longer treated as an accident. It was treated as a homicide. By early November 2022, investigators believed they had enough to move forward. On November 4th, just after Mackenzie Shirilla was released from the hospital, police were waiting. She was taken into custody and formally arrested. Prosecutors filed 17 charges against her, including 2 counts of aggravated murder and a charge related to drug trafficking. Years later, in 2025, body camera footage from that arrest would be made public. In the video, Mackenzie is seen crying as an officer places her in handcuffs. During the ride to jail, she leans back in the cruiser, closes her eyes, and appears to steady her breathing, quiet, almost detached. The case moved slowly through the system, but by the summer of 2023, it was time for a verdict. On August 14, 2023, in Cuyahoga County Court, Mackenzie Shirilla was found guilty on multiple charges, including murder, felonious assault, aggravated vehicular homicide, drug possession, and possession of criminal tools. The decision did not come from a jury. Her attorney, James McDonald, had chosen a bench trial, meaning Mackenzie placed her fate entirely in the hands of a single judge. That judge was Nancy Margaret Russo. In delivering her ruling, Judge Russo said the evidence showed the crash was not impulsive, but planned. She described Mackenzie's actions as deliberate and referred to her as hell on wheels. Prosecutors argued that Mackenzie showed no genuine remorse. They pointed to her social media activity after the crash, including videos of her dancing around Halloween, and told the court it reflected a disturbing lack of accountability for what had happened. 1 week later, on August 21, 2023, the courtroom reconvened for sentencing. Family members of the victims spoke directly to the court. Davion Flanagan, Davion's sister, asked the judge to impose the harshest sentence possible. Christine Russo, Dominic's mother, told Mackenzie that despite everything, she should be thankful she was still alive, that she still had a future her son would never get. After hearing from both sides, Judge Russo handed down the sentence. Mackenzie Shirilla was ordered to serve 2 life sentences, one for the death of Dominic Russo and one for the death of Davion Flanagan. The sentences would run at the same time with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The judge also permanently revoked her driver's license. In a statement released after sentencing, the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office said the crash was premeditated, arguing that Mackenzie chose the early morning hour, around 5:30 a.m., because the roads would be quiet, giving her a clear path to carry out what they called an intentional act. Mackenzie's legal team did not stop there. On September 25, 2023, they filed an appeal claiming there was insufficient evidence to support the convictions and pointing to what they said were clerical mistakes made during the trial. The court rejected the appeal. A second appeal followed on April 24, 2025. That, too, was denied, this time because the filing was ruled too late. Despite the verdicts, Mackenzie's family has continued to stand by her. In May 2025, they spoke publicly in an interview, saying they still believe the crash was unintentional and that she never meant to harm anyone. Today, Mackenzie Shirilla is serving her sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Her first chance at parole is scheduled for 2038. 3 lives crossed on one quiet road before sunrise. 2 ended there. 1 continues behind prison walls. And even now, years later, the same question still lingers for many who followed the case. Was it truly an accident that spiraled out of control, or a decision made long before the engine ever started? The case of Mackenzie Shirilla is shocking in its simplicity and its consequences. A teenage girl, 2 young men, 1 car, and a sequence of choices that ended in death and devastation. When the judge read the sentence, 2 life terms, Mackenzie was reportedly crying in the courtroom. But for many watching, those tears did not read as sorrow for Dominic Russo or Davion Flanagan. To some, it seemed tears for herself, the realization that her life would be behind bars. A tragic reaction, but not necessarily remorse. Was it really an accident? Or had this crash been planned in advance, as prosecutors argued, with Mackenzie intentionally targeting the people closest to her in a misguided attempt to control the relationship? Her actions raised deeper questions about accountability, impulse, and the impact of volatile relationships. Could early warning signs have prevented the tragedy? Were there pressures and conflicts that pushed someone so young to commit something so irreversible? From a legal perspective, the court concluded her actions were premeditated, carefully considering the timing, the path she chose, and the evidence that suggested prior planning. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo called her hell on wheels, underscoring the gravity of the deliberate choices that led to 2 deaths. For viewers, the lessons are stark. Cars can become weapons. Social media can blur reality and accountability. And even young adults are capable of calculated, devastating acts. Yet there is also a cautionary note about perception. Mackenzie's family continues to believe the crash was unintentional, and the debate persists in public discourse, showing how difficult it is to separate fact from narrative, intention from interpretation. This case leaves us with uncomfortable questions. How do we spot the warning signs of dangerous relationships before they escalate? What responsibilities do we have when we see a loved one struggling with conflict or aggression? And ultimately, how do we reckon with young people whose decisions destroy lives, including their own futures? The story of Mackenzie Shirilla is a reminder that choices have consequences, sometimes irreversible ones, and that the line between tragedy and crime can be thinner than most of us imagine. As you reflect on this case, consider the weight of action, inattention, and intent. Think about the ripple effects of every decision, because while Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan can never return, the lessons from their deaths remain. And for Mackenzie Shirilla, her life behind bars will serve as a constant reminder of the cost of one morning that went tragically wrong, or perhaps one morning that she made go tragically wrong. If you want to understand more about the complex, often unseen patterns that lead to crimes like this, stay vigilant, stay informed, and ask the hard questions, because awareness can save lives.